Hey, we're going to be looking at terrain today, realistic looking terrain, how to make your terrain look realistic. And the only way to do that is to actually get out into the countryside and look at how that terrain looks once it's been sat in all weathers for some time. Because wood isn't brown, it's a myriad of different colours. Metal, depending on the metal, will look different. So I'm going to look at some examples today on what those terrain types would look like realistically. Give you a better idea and maybe help you paint some more detailed, more extra, better looking terrain by looking at how that terrain looks in the real world. So let's go and have a look at some stuff and have a chat. So this is a good example of metal. It's been in the weather for some time. I mean, as we can see, the paint starting to chip. Where it's chipped, it's rusty. We've got aged green here from obviously water that's from the rain and stuff like that. So it's weathered quite significantly. So when you're making sort of metal materials for your terrain, unless it's new, it's going to look like this, or maybe not as bad as this, but you know, it's going to be looking rough, weathered and battered by all like the wind and rain. So these are sorts of things we should think about when we're making our terrain. Example of a stone wall in woodland. You can see how much moss there is on these walls. It's very dense, and that's because it's quite damp. So you kind of need to, if you're doing a wall in a woodland setting, be aware this is what a wall will probably look like. It's very damp, very wet, and so moss tends to grow on it really, really well. And it won't be just wet walls where you'll see moss. You'll see moss on walls in other various locations, but not to this extent where it covers the wall. Most walls aren't traditionally grey. I know a lot of time we paint walls a dark grey with a grey highlight, but if you look at actual walls in situ that are in the landscape, there tend to be a lot of different colours within those stones, and that can be affected by things like pollution as well as weather conditions. But stone isn't naturally grey anyway. It can be a myriad of different colours, everything from sort of a pinkish colour right through to greys, sandstone colours. And once you get things like lichen and moss growing on them as well, then that will change the colour of the stones. Now, man-made walls are also generally not, unless it's a brand new wall, the bricks will be the colour of what the material was made from. But over time, those fade through because of being affected by colour bleaching from the sun, and then wind and rain will also weather those bricks down. As we can see from this wood, that it hasn't retained its original colour. It's gone very, very green. I mean, this is an example of it being in damp ground. But wood will change colour. It's not going to be a natural brown colour. It might be when it's brand new, but once it's been in all weather conditions, it will start to change colour. Depending on the location. I mean, this is in woodland, so it's gone very, very green. On open ground, it might be because it's gone a lighter colour because it's bleached, and wind and rain has gotten to it. But this is a consideration you need to consider and need to think about. Is my wood fencing in an area that's going to be very, very damp, and therefore will it have changed colour to a more green like this, or will it have faded? Now, if we're talking about modern fencing, modern wood
treatments, then you'll have a plethora of different colours. Yeah, modern wood fencing is generally treated. That will be a variety of different colour. A lot of the colour time will be very dark brown. But after a while, once that's been hit with wind, rain and sun, that colour will tend to fade, especially on the edging, where it will be worn as well. And modern fencing preservations, you can get a variety of different colours. I've seen sort of a red colour, dark brown, greens, even blue. So if you're doing modern fencing, you can give it a coat over it of colour. Probably using contrast will probably work with a lot of them. So we're talking about woodland paths. Woodland paths aren't just a brown warm patch of ground. Humans tend to be very particular about where they walk, and once someone's walked down a path one particular way, most humans who are creatures of habit will tend to follow. So for instance, a worn path is probably worn in the middle and not on the outer edges, so you'll get some foliage on the outer edges that's built up after time, like grass and stuff like that. Humans tend to walk where other humans have walked. I don't know whether this is a safety thing or it's just habit, but they tend to walk in the same place. So when making a path, the most worn down area will probably be in the middle, or if it's vehicles of any description have been across it, it'll be where the wheels have gone. And people will stick to the same route. That's why you see in some places where over time the carts in the past have worn deep ruts, and they're still visible today. We've been fortunate in the 2 weekends I've been filming, the weeks in between, where I live got a dumping of snow, so we can talk about that, because a lot of people do use snow on basing and within terrain, and most of the time people just do white snow, and that's fine when it's first settled. No animals or humans have ventured into that area. But generally, once people start walking on it, once animals start walking on it, then it changes. It becomes grey. It becomes quite more like an ice-looking colour. Where people have had mud on their boots or mud's been flicked up, then it gets dirty. It gets a manky brown slush colour. So if you're going to do realistic snow bases, and you're doing snow bases for an army, then it probably ain't going to be pure white. It's going to be a mix of white, grey and dirt looking. The sort of stuff that looks pretty disgusting once people have been walking through it after it's been on the ground for a while. Where I said that humans are quite predictable creatures, and they'll use the same path constantly, we can see this where it's been snowing. Right down the middle is where everyone's been walking, and it's where I'm walking. So when you're making paths, you need to take into account that the most worn area will be where people have walked. We have here what was an old rail line, and you can see the scar left in the landscape where it's been cut to facilitate the railway line going through. So these are observations you probably need to pay attention to, and where man has been and no longer uses for industrialisation. One of the things we can see from these images of this old road is that nature's taken over it quite quickly. It's reclaimed itself very quickly and very easily. So anyone who's doing post-apocalyptic type of boards, basing, modelling or anything like that, needs to take into account that nature will claw its way back very quickly and very easily, and it'll assume what was an urban environment, suddenly becomes very overgrown. You only have to look at places like Chernobyl and places that have been abandoned around the world to have that, to see that in action. So those things we need to take into account when doing post-apocalyptic stuff. Is that nature will reclaim what the areas we've turned into urban areas. So most materials that are man-made won't hold up in natural conditions for long. Some take very, very quickly to deteriorate, some over a span of hundreds of years, but eventually they will all wear and deteriorate. So if you're wanting to look realistic, you need to accept that those materials aren't going to look brand new. They're going to be an element of wear and tear on them, erosion. But also that things like lichen, moss on stone, for instance, will accumulate after a period of years. Human interaction with those materials will also cause damage and deterioration. Colours will tend to be a mix. For instance, trees aren't just brown, as I've said before. They're a mixture of colours. The bark will have elements of green on there. They'll have different shades of brown. Everything from very light colour, if it's a silver birch, to very dark bark. And where the bark's been taken off, then the underneath will be a different colour as well. So you need to take all that into consideration if you want to make your stuff look more realistic in the landscape.